Do you have anything else on South Korea before we move on to Afghanistan?
No, let's go to Afghanistan.
All right, so I got a couple stories here from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com on the U.S. alleging that the Taliban fired a rocket onto a base that houses U.S. soldiers in southern Afghanistan. The U.S. says that this is a violation of the what they call a peace agreement with the Taliban, although I think that's using the word peace very, very generously to call that a peace agreement. The Taliban, for their part, say that they did not fire the rocket and are investigating it. The U.S. in their statement sounded absolutely sure that they thought it was the Taliban that was behind it, and then did call it a violation of the peace agreement. And so I think that's important because this is, I believe, the first time the U.S. has formally accused or publicly accused the Taliban of violating that peace agreement. And then two big questions that this story raises for me would be, first, is that how is it that the Taliban know which all Afghan bases house U.S. soldiers? Maybe it was a well-known base, and that's how the U.S. feels that. But I mean, look, there could be U.S. soldiers anywhere, and a lot of these bases are fairly massive, and so I think this rocket landed in empty space. If you got like a big runway on a base or hangars and stuff like that, there's plenty of room for rockets to land without getting anywhere near anybody. We see this a lot in Iraq, and that seemed to happen again there. And the Taliban, said it wasn't them and that they're investigating it. And so you at least, I know this was southern Afghanistan, which isn't the normal operating area for ISIS, but I would suppose it's possible that, the Islamic State would do something like this because they seem to be really trying to provoke and stir up things in Afghanistan, even with their, far more limited presence in the past year and a half as the Taliban have done a number on them, along with the U.S. and Special Forces operations. So I was wondering what you thought about this, Will.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned a couple of things that I could, I think, comment on. The first one is that I think the base was sort of a large American base, Camp Bastion. So I think it was sort of like a well-known, a well-known base that housed American troops. And I believe it was also in the Helmand province too. And so that is like sort of the Taliban's their area. So if we were asking like how would they know American troops are there, I guess that might make might make more sense that they have better intel on a base that it's actually in the Helmand province. But one thing I wanted to ask you, actually, just in terms of to clarify, the last I had seen, all we had on this were three anonymous officials telling this to the New York Times that like that the Taliban fired like what, a dozen rockets, I think, at this one base. Was it just those three anonymous officials? Or do we have like a formal statement now?
Well, what kind of seemed to confirm it to me is that the Taliban didn't deny that the rocket attack happened. They seem to feel like it did because they said they're investigating it and trying to figure it out. And so when the Taliban didn't deny the attack happened, I assumed that it did. But that's a good point, is that the sourcing on this, at least from the English side of things, is pretty thin.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I was just curious if there was like a formal statement because yeah, like it is interesting the Taliban denied it too. They even raised the possibility that some breakoff faction that like might be kind of affiliated with them may have done it, I think, and said that we're going to look into that and see like what might have happened. But yeah, as far as I saw, I didn't think there were like the Pentagon. I don't think they came out and formally like announced this and said like, oh, this is a big violation. I think it was just the three officials anonymously telling this to the Times that like, oh yeah, this is a so there is I think a distinction there.
Yeah, no, that's an important point because, you say, and I kind of just read it as an official leak, as the U.S. telling the Taliban that, hey, this is a violation, and just doing it through anonymous sources rather than a spokesman. But as we know, like from the Taliban bounty story with Russia,
Exactly.
there is reason to be skeptical of intelligence coming out of Afghanistan. And so, fantastic point here, Will. I should have really thought about this as I was thinking through this story before, that we really do need to consider the possibility that U.S. intelligence officials put this story in the news. I'm sure there's a couple of reasons, but one is obviously to make it less politically advantageous for Donald Trump to remove troops from Afghanistan leading up to the election here. If Donald Trump pulls out all troops now and Afghanistan gets really nasty, like it might when U.S. troops leave, not that that's not a reason to pull out U.S. troops, but I will guarantee you, suddenly the life of every Afghan is going to be very important to Rachel Maddow should Donald Trump pull out troops. She will make sure that every single Afghan that dies after Donald Trump, leaves with U.S. troops, that every single one of those deaths, just like every single Corona death, is all his fault. I'm
Right. They all
sure
have
that's
his name on it.
right. I'm sure Taliban guy walks into, some building in downtown Kabul and shoots 10 people, Donald Trump's fault. Afghan army blows up a house full of people trying to hit a Taliban camp, Donald Trump's fault.
Right.
Rogue Afghan special operations unit massacres 10 people because they can, Donald Trump's fault. That one actually would be anyways, but if we left, it would be less his fault, but then, the way they see it, it would be more. So I guess my biggest concern with this is that it isn't going to be, the straw that breaks the camel's back on this Afghan peace deal. However, if a President Biden takes office, I think what they're going to do is they're going to roll out the bounty story. They're going to roll out this attack. They're going to roll out anything the Taliban has done in the last 6 months and, the next 6 months, and be like, for all of these reasons, the Taliban haven't met their end of the peace deal, and so we're not withdrawing U.S. troops. So I think that's probably the end game here, is that this isn't necessarily something that's going to turn the tide on the peace deal in the next, a couple weeks, but
Right.
it's going to be, one of those straws when it comes to either a Biden presidency or, it's Trump time to withdraw. Everybody's going to be telling him, you really can't, because the Taliban attacked a U.S. base, and the Taliban are supported by the Russians, and the Taliban are supported by the Iranians. And by the time we get, to January, there's probably going to be 4 more groups on that list. And the Taliban are also going to be doing terrible things to women and children and everybody else to make sure that the U.S. and the American people feel like we can never leave that country.
Right, right. Yeah, I absolutely agree on sort of the optics of just how this could be spun, by a future administration, this type of story. To me, I think there are a couple possibilities with this. Like, I think it is possible that the Taliban did launch this attack and that they're denying it, and that the Trump administration doesn't want to acknowledge it formally because they don't want to screw up the peace deal. Trump wants that for his election chances. So I think that's at least in the realm of possibility. But I think also equally plausible is what you were saying, that like maybe these officials are just feeding this BS to the New York Times to scuttle that deal, because there are many political forces arrayed against the president that would like to see that peace deal fall apart, and people who are ideologically in favor of the war too, who might they might not care about the Trump, but they want to keep fighting the Afghan war. Another possibility is that these American officials, just exactly like we saw with the bounty story, that they were fed BS from the Afghan government, who'd got this from whatever tortured intel that they got out of some criminal or something. So I think there's a lot of different possibilities for what could explain all this. But I think bottom line is we don't have very good indication that the Taliban for sure did do this. And so if they're going to try to use this to like scuttle the peace deal or screw that up, then I want to see much better evidence than what they're currently giving us, what we saw in this Times report.
Right. And I will say, I don't think the Taliban are the same organizationally as, let's say, the U.S. Army,
Right.
where if, Mattis says, under no circumstances does anybody attack Iran, I'm pretty confident that no troops are, no rogue colonel is going to go out there and launch an independent attack on Iran. That
Right.
said, maybe things are a little bit different in Afghanistan, where if some local in Helmand felt wronged by the U.S. government or the Afghan government, he put together this attack on this base, maybe not thinking about the wider implication or doing it to like screw up the deal or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but that, this could have been somebody who is a Pashtun or who even is loosely associated as a member of the Taliban without it actually being a Taliban ordered attack on the United States. So I think there's a lot of room for some different things to have happened here. But from our perspective, the most important thing is that this in no way changes the name of the game, that the U.S. has to get out of Afghanistan as soon as
Absolutely.
possible.
Absolutely, I agree. And just, I guess, one last thing I'd add is you're talking about, maybe there are, some Pashtun group in Afghanistan who's against the deal, and that is exactly what the Taliban commander told the Times. That he said, we didn't do this, but there may be breakoff groups. There are groups out here who don't like the deal that we signed with the Americans, and that they may have that as a goal in mind to scuttle it. So yet another possibility.
Right. And look, I'm sure the Taliban commanders aren't all fantastic people, so maybe they're screwing over some local groups too with the way the deal is all playing out. Where had the
Right.
U.S. continued the war for a little bit longer, maybe it would have allowed other people some opportunity for to like carve out a little fiefdom for themselves. And we know Afghan operates in that way a lot.